All right, today we're diving into a book that, well, has definitely caused a stir. It's called The Rational Male by Rollo Tomassi, and it's built up both a massive following and some pretty fierce critics. Our job here isn't to take sides, but just to unpack what this influential book is actually saying. So let me ask you something. Do you think there are unspoken rules that govern attraction, that dictate how relationships really work? The entire premise of The Rational Male is that the answer is a big, resounding yes. And not only that, but that most of us are basically programmed not to see these rules. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at what the book calls the plugged-in world. Then, we'll talk about what it means to take the red pill. From there, we'll get into the whole alpha, beta, and plates thing, see how that all ties into personal power, and finally, explore how this worldview tries to rewrite the social rulebook. To really get what this book is trying to say, you have to start with its big central metaphor. You guessed it, the Matrix. But look, this isn't just some casual reference to a cool movie. For this author, it's everything. It's the absolute foundation of his entire worldview. And the author leans on this quote from Morpheus pretty hard. The point he's making is that society, as he sees it, is a system of beliefs that's so deep-seated that most people are just, well, they're not ready to be unplugged. And he claims they'll actually fight to protect that very system, even when it's not really working for them. So what is this system then? What's the code running the whole thing? Well, according to the book, it's something the author calls the feminine imperative. And what he means by that is a social setup where female priorities are basically put first, and that this shapes, well, pretty much everything, from dating rules to what we're all taught a good man is supposed to be. And if this plugged-in world is a factory, what's the product it spits out? The author has a pretty memorable term for it, the average frustrated chump, or AFC. You know the type he's talking about. The man who plays by all the rules, does everything he's supposed to do, the classic nice guy, but he's just constantly frustrated and getting nowhere in his relationships. This AFC, he's the exact person the book is trying to unplug. Okay, so for this average frustrated chump, the book offers up a pretty radical fix. It's an awakening. And to borrow that famous line from The Matrix, it means taking the red pill. So what does taking the red pill actually mean in the context of this book? It's basically a metaphor for just tossing out all the conventional wisdom you've been taught about relationships and gender. It's about looking at it all through a new, totally unfiltered lens. The author calls this lens harsh behaviorism. And the idea there is simple. Forget the romantic ideals. What really matters are our biological drives and what we can actually see people do. And the heart of this whole red pill worldview, it really boils down to what the book sees as a basic conflict in reproductive strategies. It argues the male strategy is all about quantity, spreading genes to as many people as possible. On the other hand, it claims the female strategy is all about quality. It's about finding the best possible genes and at the same time locking down security and resources for the long haul. And this quote right here, it really gets to the core of that idea. The argument being made is that for a woman's reproductive strategy to work, a man's strategy has to, well, fail. He has to give up his approach in favor of hers. This idea that it's a kind of zero-sum game, that's the engine that powers almost everything else in the book. All right, so once you've supposedly taken this red pill, the book gives you a whole new language to operate in this new reality. This is where we learn the new rules. Okay, let's talk about two of the most famous or maybe infamous terms from this book, alpha and beta. Now, it's super important to get how the author defines these. He's not talking about fixed personality types. He's talking about mindsets. An alpha mindset is just being self-directed and confident. He says this could be a great leader or it could be a complete jerk. The beta mindset, on the other hand, is the one that follows all those social rules we talked about. This is often that nice guy who's trying to please everyone to get what he wants. So to show what he means by a natural alpha, the book picks a really weird example. It's not some CEO or war hero. No, it's Corey Worthington, this Australian teenager who threw a completely out-of-control party and then gave this legendary TV interview where he just had zero regrets. The author actually calls him the Alpha Buddha, an example of pure, raw confidence, totally free of any social shame. So how do you actually develop this alpha mindset according to the book? Well, one of the main strategies is something it calls plate theory. Now, what's that? It's the idea of dating multiple women at the same time non-exclusively. And the goal, as the book presents it, isn't just to be promiscuous. It's a mental trick to shift your brain from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance. The argument is that when you have options, you become more selective, and that builds the kind of genuine confidence that he claims is attractive. Okay, so you have the red pill awakening, you have these alpha mindsets, you've got plate theory. All these concepts are building up to one big thing. And according to the author, it's not really just about dating. The ultimate goal here is to completely redefine what personal power even means. And this is where he draws a really clear line in the sand. He argues that all the stuff we usually think of as power, money, fancy job titles, status, that's all just the symptoms of power. Real power, in his view, is the source code underneath it all. And that source code is self-determination. So real power, as the book defines it, is simply this: the degree to which we actually control the directions of our lives. It's about being your own North Star, making your decisions based on your own internal compass, without being pushed around by what society or anyone else thinks you should do. And to paint a picture of this literally, the book brings up the artist Paul Gauguin. Here's a guy who was a successful banker, had a family, the whole 9 yards. And then, in middle age, he just walked away from it all. He abandoned everything to go paint in Tahiti. The book holds this up as the ultimate example. It's not about being selfish, it's about a man seizing total control over his own life's path. So, if you start thinking about power this way, how does it change how you see the world? Well, according to the book, once you adopt this framework, you start to see every social interaction, and especially dating, as a kind of marketplace. A marketplace that has its own very specific, very unwritten rules. And a huge piece of this new perspective is what's called the sexual marketplace, or SMP for short. In this model, men and women each have a sexual market value, or SMV, and this isn't some fixed number. It's something that changes, and changes dramatically over a person's lifetime. Now, this is where the book lays out a pretty controversial timeline for this market value. It claims that a woman's SMV is at its absolute peak in her early 20s, and at that point, her priority is what it calls good genes, physical attraction. As she gets older, the argument goes, her focus shifts toward security. By her 30s, the goal is to find a proven commodity. And for men? The book argues it's almost the exact opposite. A man's SMV is supposedly tied to his status and his resources, which means it generally peaks much later, somewhere around his late 30s. And this brings us right back to where we started, the social rules. The book claims that a lot of the common things we hear, advice like just be yourself or getting the classic let's just be friends speech, are actually tools that are designed to hide how this marketplace really works. Even the idea of a quality woman gets reframed as a kind of social invention designed to give one side of the marketplace an advantage. So when you boil it all down, the entire book really rests on one core idea, that underneath all of our social niceties, there are hidden rules and raw biological drives pulling the strings. The author's whole point is that by understanding and accepting this hidden reality, only then can men actually navigate their relationships effectively and ultimately take back control of their own lives. And so that leaves us with one final big question, a question that really gets to the core of what this book is challenging. If it's true, if social conventions are just made up, if they aren't absolute truths, then who gets to write the rules? And maybe even more importantly, who do the current rules benefit? That's the question the rational male really wants you to think about.